Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Pla.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast, Cryptography Edition. What? Tell you more about that in just a second. I'm your host, Andrew Pla, at Andrew Pla Tech. You can connect with me on all socials. I'm going to be posting clips from this podcast probably as well. So check me out there. And if you haven't heard, every single Wednesday, we have PowerShell Wednesdays. And every single Wednesday, we are teaching PowerShell. Recently, I've been a live coding kick. So I've been doing a lot of live coding, a lot of pair programming, a lot of great stuff happening there. So make sure to tune in and check us out on the PDQ Discord, discord.gg/PDQ, PowerShell scripting channel. If you're a customer, awesome. We got some channels for you. If you are not a customer, just mute the product channels. All good. And check us out in PowerShell scripting. We have a really supportive group there. Seriously, if you are in your journey trying to learn PowerShell, please join us there and give us some feedback. If there's something you want to hear, let us know. We are happy to accommodate you. And check out the recordings if you don't want to join us live every single Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. That's that. That's your PowerShell fix. I'm about to give you a fantastic guest who's going to give us our cryptography fix. And have we ever had a cryptographer on the show before, an expert in the field? Not once. Maybe people who take advantage of cryptography and it's the way that it's available in IT, but nobody who has sort of an understanding of the inner workings. And that's who I'm bringing you today. That's Dr. Al Carlson, a cryptographer, mathematician, engineer, and longtime educator whose career spans more than 4 decades across integrated circuits, military intelligence, critical infrastructure protection, and cutting-edge encryption research, which we're going to be diving into today. And I met Al a couple of years ago at Spice World. On the last day, kind of had a little bit of a chat, didn't get into his background at all. And then this year he came up again. I said, hey, ended up talking a little bit. And he started talking about cryptography. And I was like, whoa, my brain started lighting up. You know, I talked to a lot of awesome people at conferences. Just straight up, my whole brain was just boom, loving everything he was saying. He was fortunate enough to talk to me for an hour and gave me some really cool insights into how he was able to break AES. And he showed it. They like took a freaking pin on a paper and showed me the graphs of like all the XORs and the ways that data was transmitted. And at the end of it, I was like, man, would you be interested in joining me on the PowerShell podcast? And I'm so fortunate that he said yes, because we have Dr. Al Carlson. Welcome, my friend. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm honored to have that chance.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I'm very excited that I get to have this conversation with you, dive into some of the things that we've talked about a little bit so far. We did a little bit of a pre-show together, and yeah, it was a great chat. There's a lot of great things coming in this chat today, but I want to start off with a little bit of your background in cryptography, because in IT, cryptography is something that we definitely encounter all the time, right? HTTPS, for example, like what we're using right now, like security and encryption is everywhere. What's your background with cryptography though?
Well, I started back in, just after I graduated with my bachelor's degree. I went to the U.S. Army, and I was assigned as a tactical and strategic electronic warfare officer with specialties in cryptography. And I really enjoyed that part of things and practiced a little bit until I went back for my PhD. And when I went back for my doctorate, I had the chance to work with a really good professor, and I had some ideas about cryptography, and they gradually developed over a 10-year period into what I did for my dissertation. But we kind of looked at a weird thing. We looked at set theory and how set theory could be applied to cryptography to break codes and ciphers and to make better codes and ciphers. From that point on, I worked in embedded systems, and I had to put crypto in. But it was really enjoyable. By the time I got finished with my course of study, we'd learned a great deal about cryptography, and then I went off to universities to teach that. We developed a couple courses, and I was asked by a business owner to come and be the chief science officer and develop new cryptography. I did that until our company, unfortunately, was taken over by the shareholders and went back to university. And now I'm just having a blast writing papers about cryptography and studying with a group of professors that I know around the country who are working on advanced cryptography systems.
You were telling me there's not many people who work in cryptography, and if you're sort of actually, working, you sort of know each other. Is that sort of true?
That is true. A lot of the people who work in cryptography and are specialists, and there's only a couple handfuls really around, we know each other, at least by reputation, and I know a number of them personally. But most of the people who work in cryptography for companies and are supposed to be the specialists in cryptographic systems have had maybe half, or if they're really good, a whole semester in a cryptography class. And that's what qualifies them to the rest of the world as experts.
Yeah, and based on some of the conversations we had in the past and we will have later, to really make headway on this, you need to have a very deep background in math, and you need to spend a lot of time looking at all the moving parts. And in cryptography, there are quite a few moving parts that a small amount of exposure is not going to allow you to have a full grasp of, in my opinion. I don't know if you can speak to that.
Well, I believe that that's true because a lot of people do not have the true background that is necessary. You have to have a good background in discrete mathematics and play with those mathematics, and also work in abstract algebra to make the world work the way that you want. And unfortunately, most people don't go down that road because it's hard.
Yeah. And I think there's also, if there's not a ton of people in it, there's not a lot of those sort of moments in life that can lead people to say like, oh, hey, that is something I could do as well. But yeah, I think there's a lot of, whenever I teach someone like PowerShell, it's easy for me to make the connection of like, hey, you learn this, you can apply it right here. It's right. You type the line, you press enter, it's good for you. I think with some of the things that you're dealing with cryptography is the foundation can feel so far removed from what you're going to end up working on and the problems you're going to be approaching that it can be harder for people to make that connection. But it seems like it's worth it if you are able to invest the time. And it seems like you can maybe speak to how much that investment is paid off.
Well, that is true. First of all, you have to remember that the world is made of patterns and language is made of patterns. Some of the people who worked in this, like Langdon and Postal, have said that every individual has their own language. And the languages that we see as English or French or German are actually the intersection. See, here we start in with the set theory that goes into my major work. And what is happening here is these patterns are the same for these individuals. And we take a look at say, for instance, English. You can see the patterns of words. And it turns out that maybe 3,000 words are probably 50 to 90% of the language, up to about 8,000 words. And we have a very rich background in that, but other languages tend not to have as many words. And since we're talking about things, these words are repeated over and over again, and they create the patterns that help someone who is trying to break a cipher need to use. And it also turns out that there was some work on something called isomorphic cipher reduction. And isomorphic cipher reduction is really fun because what it does is it says every cipher, and this is Feistel back in 1973, he said every cipher is in its basis part is a substitution cipher. So it allows you to be able to map all ciphers that don't have inherent randomization, and we can talk about that later, to be replaced with an equivalent substitution cipher. And there's a property that I'm sure everybody knows. It's called idempotence. Great name for what it says is if you have a substitution cipher and you encrypt it again, because we all know that if one encryption is good, more than one encryption must be better. But it turns out that if you combine those substitutions together, they kind of compress and become one substitution. And so all these big ciphers that you hear about, like AES or the Feistel round ciphers, all collapse into one substitution cipher, which means that you can attack it the same way as you attack a simple substitution cipher. So AES is not as strong as people believe.
Absolutely. And I believe you gave a talk about that in 2015 at DEF CON. But I want to just break this down, make sure I'm following, make sure those out there. So substitution cipher, that would be like A equals 1, B equals 2. That would be a very simple example of a substitution cipher. Would you say?
Yes.
And so effectively, all this encryption that's going on regarding AES is not affecting what's underneath it. It's only adding things on top. So the substitution cipher, it would just still be able to work. Is that kind of, am I on the right page? But I'm curious about how it works.
Okay, so let's take a look at a round cipher. Usually there are 16 rounds, and it's preceded and followed by a permutation cipher. Okay, so think about this permutation cipher. The permutation cipher maps a bit to another bit. Mm-hmm. But when you do that, isn't that just a substitution with a constraint?
I think it absolutely is. I'm following that, right? We're just taking something, say one's in this location. Okay, every single one that comes in is just going to be adjusted one to the right, for example. So you can,
like that. Or that particular one is called the rotation cipher. But the rotation cipher, or rot n cipher, is a permutation, which we've just shown is an S cipher. Okay, so let's take a simple Feistel round cipher. Each round has the same things that happen. Mm-hmm. You take the input, you cut it in half, and on one side you do an XOR cipher, followed by a substitution, followed by a rotation. Okay? So what happens there? The other end, by the way, nothing happens. They go, oh, it's unbalanced. You can't break it. But we can, because we can add an XOR cipher in there with a key of 0. We can do a straight through substitution and just let the rotation happen. Well, we know the rotation, as we've shown, is a P cipher or permutation cipher, which we've shown is an S cipher. Okay, so let's take a look at the XOR cipher. The XOR cipher has a key, but when you use the key, it maps right back to the same alphabet, and it creates a substitution, right? Again, with constraints.
Yep.
So that's an S cipher. So now we've got an S cipher followed by a substitution cipher, which is an S cipher, followed by a rotation, which is an S cipher. So we have S1, S2, S3. But by idempotence, that collapses to S prime. Okay, so we can replace it with one substitution that has a map that's the effective equivalent of those three ciphers. So now we've shown that a round is actually an S cipher. Well, now we've got 16 rounds. So you got S1 through S16, which collapses by idempotence into S double prime. So now what we've got is we've got the permutation, which is an S, all the rounds, which are an S, and another permutation with an S. And what do we have? We have a substitution cipher. So these big ciphers that everybody wants to break, they say things like, well, you have to break each cipher. The answer is, no, you don't. If you collapse them into a single cipher, instead of having 50 or 60 different ciphers to break, you've got one.
So you essentially make the amount of brute forcing, so to speak, to crack something way simpler because there's one thing you're solving. You're not solving 60 problems. You've taken those 60 problems, collapsed them down into one because you and others are experts at math and you know what all these things mean. And there's ways to explain it that make sense if you know math. And so that's how you're able to sort of break it. Is like you've collapsed it down. Yeah. Now it's just a substitute. You just try it and it works eventually.
Yeah, that means that there is a universal break that works on all ciphers, with the exception of maybe those that have an internal built randomization, and we don't want to go and use those ciphers. Those are nasty, and they don't work very well. And so what you get is you get a universal way to break ciphers, and it's not as complicated as people think.
So what does this mean practically? And I want to talk about the AES, but I mean in today's day. So we're talking like, is there anything secure, or is everything sort of collapsible? And Is it easy to collapse where like maybe attackers are able to do this, or what's the current state of things?
For most ciphers, that's true. There is one type of cipher that I found that isn't susceptible to this approach. Okay, it's called a polymorphic cipher. And in a polymorphic cipher, meaning many forms, what you do is you break up the message into what we call shards, or essentially blocks of ciphers. And you give each one a different cipher and key pair. And so what you get is you get problem number one, problem number two. And they are what we call orthogonal to each other, which means that they're completely independent, right? The effect of this is you can't add everything together, because if you add part of the next block, you've got what we call a poison corpus, okay? Which means that you have bad data with good data. And what does that result in? Bad answer, okay? If you go short, then you don't have as much information as you need. And if you make those blocks under what's Shannon called the unicity distance, which says that enough information accumulates to be able to break, then you still don't have enough information and you can't break it. And that's a nasty cipher to play with.
There's so many interesting things I want to bring up here. I'm curious. With this being true, is that why people with the cryptography knowledge that you have are considered sort of like weapons, so to speak? I don't remember the official way, but like I've heard it's the skills that you have are potentially could be used for harm, potentially.
Yes, that is true. They can be. It depends on how the person is aligned. So you have the white hats, the gray hats, and the black hats. The black hats do it for evil. Those are the hackers that are making money for it, or working for the bad guys. The white hat hackers, they do all the nice things and never go into the checking the bad stuff out. I am what's called the gray hat. I do some of the bad things so that what we can do is find out how to make ciphers better and how we can make them more secure.
And that follows the ethos of security and hacking. It's like we do these things to make it better so we can secure and improve in the future. So hard to have any criticism with that approach. And there's no way to do it if you just pretend like everything's okay. Well, it doesn't actually solve the problem that still exists just because you don't bring it up.
Yes, everything. You have to, there's a good and a bad with everything. And so you have to balance it, and you have to try and stay ahead of the bad guys.
Absolutely. Do you think, one would imagine that there got to be some very well-funded APTs that would maybe invest in someone's whole life to be able to figure out some of this stuff. Those are conversations that I'm involved in at all or anything, but it's just interesting to think about, because the amount of background knowledge you need to really approach these problems is incredibly significant. And it sounds like kind of hard to find. There's a limited number of mentors in the space.
That is true. When I was doing my dissertation, it took 10 years of study to learn enough about cryptography to really be able to practice it. I had to have 2 major professors in order to go through this. One of them was a brilliant man, Dr. Rick Wells, and he's unfortunately passed away this last year. He knew a fair amount about information theory. And the other one, Dr. Hiramoto, he was a wonderful man who kept me grounded, and he is the one who would talk to me, and we'd have these discussions that went 4 or 5 hours in his office, and we'd fight about what would work and what math wouldn't work. And I'm happy to say I still work with him, and he helped shape this. He is one of the guys that helped me to understand set theory and move it from Hilbert space, which is a 3D space, like a real world, Cartesian coordinates, into topological space, which is a space that doesn't exist, and break the problem in topological space and then map it back into the real world.
Okay, so a couple things there. One, importance of mentorship. We see that all the time. It sounds like you've been really empowered by having someone who's willing to invest the time to help you with these parts that are more challenging that exist in all industries, but seems like that was sort of impactful for you. But when you're talking about Cartesian and all this stuff, so basically you're kind of going from trying to solve a problem, just like maybe writing it on paper, to now you're sort of going into your mind and viewing the whole system and all the moving parts and sort of viewing it from that perspective. Is that sort of true?
That is definitely true. When I started working in the area, one of the things I did was I had to create a model in my mind to be able to see what was going on. And I do that, and I walk around the model. I'm pretty much detached, believe it or not, from my physical body. And I have to worry about making it back, because most cryptographers who do this, they end up somewhat mentally challenged. Like, think about Good Will Hunting and those kinds of movies. This is something that people do. And the only way that I can keep myself well-founded is I have to have my wife talking to me while I'm doing it. But I go in there and I take a look at how information flows and where it necks down, and the functions that are weak that I can take advantage of, where I can derive information as opposed to seeing it, where I can see information. And when we were talking at the show, I showed you a point where the information necked down and we could derive the information. By the way, for those who are listening, we call that place X because we're kind of strange people, and X marks the spot that we were going to attack. But you have to think outside the box. It turns out that most people are very good at finding the complex ways to get in, and they miss the easy ways. And I won't lie to you, I enjoy finding the easy ways because the math is very, very beautiful, and it's very, very short. It's elegant. And so I like to attack that way. And I've done that a number of times in my career to make things, shall we say, interesting. And as we were talking about, and I drew the pictures, it turned out to be very simple.
Yeah. Which, gosh, I love that so much. I had a realization maybe 8 years ago or so where I was just driving. And I realized, holy crap, everything in life is patterns. Like, this whole time, it's all been patterns. And ever since then, I mean, it really changed my approach to life in a lot of ways. And I learned some of this from, solving problems with PowerShell, addressing like, okay, what does our business really need? What are all the moving parts? Kind of like what you're doing, a little bit more transparent I didn't really have to think that hard, but like, okay, where can we inject and interact with the data and keep it moving to automate processes and things like that? So I was able to start thinking in systems. And whenever I started doing that, I view everything as systems now. Your local community is a system of people, which is inside of a smaller system of a larger system. Everything is systems. And so if you're able to find things that solve a problem in a system, it applies to everything. So I geek out over that super hard. And I have a ton of appreciation for how much time you've given that in your brain to develop these structures. Even when you were talking about isomorphic key reduction and sort of going through the different steps, I think that is a great example of sort of what you're speaking to, where there's a lot of pivot points in what you were discussing, but your ability to view it and keep track of all of it is just, as someone who does a certain degree of that, I have a lot of respect because I can see it just sort of displayed in front of us. But I want to speak about how you came to that point, because you were talking about whenever you're addressing problems, you're sort of in, would you call it maybe a meditative like state, where you're sort of detached from your current self and you're really just in sort of a brainy space where you're just looking at the problem that you spent a lot of time thinking about, probably leading up to it, and sort of just allowing yourself to solve the problem deep there.
Yes, actually, that's true, because when you're in that meta state, right, you're walking around a model that you've created that you can see, and you can look at it at different angles, and you can get more information. One of the strangest things I've ever seen with patterns is it turns out that sometimes if you increase the complexity of the problem a little bit and build it a little bigger, it will collapse down on itself, because the patterns are there that you can abstract and then use to calculate things.
So substitution cipher, there it is again, right? That's the same thing we're talking about here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is the basis of all cryptography, is the substitution cipher. And it's been around, my gosh, for 3,000 years.
The fundamentals.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh.
And that's one of the things you have to worry about is, whenever you see a problem that looks insoluble and it looks like the math is really tough, go back to the basics. That's what Dr. Hiramoto always told me. If you can't understand what's going on, go back to the basics.
I think that applies to everything in life, really. Like so often, go back to the basics. So it's cool to see it applied here. And I love, I talk to a lot of people in tech where a lot of times in tech, we feel like what we're doing is super special. Oh, this novel technology, AI, code, we feel like it's special. I kind of like highlighting how everything is pretty much the same and what we're doing isn't that special at all. Just, you have some background knowledge in a certain thing so you can speak to it. But the pattern probably exists in many verticals in the world as things tend to go. And if you can look at things from a higher angle. And I really am curious to know more about that approach to sort of the meditative state of viewing problems, because I enjoy thinking of the full system at play, but I sort of just do it in my head, like without being able to walk around. Like I just kind of see the structure here and I don't, I'm, what was it like to start learning to do that sort of meditative problem solving thing? Because I maybe practice it or something.
Well, it was a little strange the first time it happened. And I found that what I had to do was I had to start by looking at the problem and understanding the way it was presently used. Okay. And so once I got the study over and I had memorized what was there, then I started thinking like you're talking about, where you could see it, it takes practice to make the picture in your mind. As I'm sure it takes a lot of practice. But then one day when I was practicing that, I got very, very intent on the problem and I started rotating it in my mind. And then I stepped into it and I went, holy cow, I can see it all around me. And I can walk around it. And if I do a little bit more thinking, I can see the flow of information. I can see where it comes together and what is happening. And that became my standard after that. I would read, memorize, construct the model, rotate the model, and then walk into it. And as I said, my wife was freaked out. One of the times I did it, I was in a shopping mall in Moscow, Idaho. And I was so intent in walking around, my wife just said, to heck with this, and went shopping. And the police came by because I was reported as maybe being dead sitting on the bench. And the police went around and found my wife, and she came back and said, no, he's just thinking. And she called me and I could hear her, and she said it was time to come out. So I just backed out. Yeah. But that did freak out a few people.
I can imagine. I have definitely not gotten into that level. It's odd because I feel like it's one of my biggest strengths in life is my ability to distill things down to a system and understand the moving parts. And oftentimes that includes humans. And I have a pretty good ability to empathize and like understand where people are coming from. And I feel like it's one of my biggest strengths that I can bring to a workplace is having that empowers the other skills. It's very hard to communicate that because not everyone has an appreciation for it. So it doesn't quite hit the resume, but I think it's,
sorry about that.
no worries. Busy guy. I think it's just so interesting though, to see how there's just an upper bound limit on everything. If you invest enough time, you have no clue the wild things that humans are capable of. And I think that you are a testament to that, where you have really pushed your brain in some ways to show what's possible. And now I personally feel very honored that you're sharing that with us.
Well, I'm glad to share that because it takes practice. You really have to sit down and think about it and use it. Because what you were talking about, getting the picture in your head, that's a lot of the process. Because visualization of problems allows you to see things that that you normally wouldn't be able to operate on. And so, I found that walking into it helped me because I could take the visualization and I could see the relationship between things. And once you know the relationship between things, you can either break or enhance them. But
Yep.
I don't do that with people because I would have to say me and people don't get along very well because I'm a little too mathy. And, when I go out with my wife, she always says, don't tell them what you do for a living. Just say you write papers.
I can relate to some of that because I think there's definitely trade-offs in life. You can't be amazing at everything. There are definitely, and as I've kind of grown in more of my public-y stuff, I've definitely sacrificed a little bit of the other stuff, and it's just kind of the nature of things. So that's just a good reminder to those people out there. Don't compare yourself to every single person. We all have our things that we're good at, we're bad at. We all have our things that just inherently we're going to succeed at, and other things that are going to take time. And some people take more time than others. But the important thing is that you are putting in work to whatever kind of goal you have. There's just really amazing things that can happen from that. And the structures that you can build in your mind is just so much fun. But I want to loop back to cryptography just a little bit because I'm curious. The AES findings, let's translate to what that looked like practically. So you delivered a paper that sort of showed how you were able to distill it down to a substitution cipher.
Right.
And you delivered that at DEF CON and published a paper. Could you share a little bit about that?
Well, we published a paper because DEF CON doesn't get through to enough people, especially the people on the white hat side.
Right.
But what we did there was we realized that the encryption in the block there followed the one-to-one principle. Now, the one-to-one principle says that each plain text maps to exactly one ciphertext and vice versa. So what we did was we looked for what are called collisions. That means where the ciphertext in one block is the same as ciphertext in another. And then we backed it up and said, okay, if we know that these two ciphertexts are the same, then the other side of the encryption has to be the same with each other. And it turns out that the formula to get what's on the other side is fairly simple. And if we make sets of how it got that way, then we know what possible plain text there were. And if you keep one block the same and you go down through the collisions, you keep constricting the set because you need an intersection. See, there goes the sets again. I guess this is to somebody who has a hammer, everything is a nail. For me, it's if I can express it as sets, I'm good, right? So it keeps getting smaller and smaller until you get one answer. And once you have one answer, it was trivial to take that for every collision, and we could directly see the plain text that caused it. But we could also see that if it didn't fall out, then that ciphertext was not correct. And so we're actually constricting the other sets at the same time. Now, when we did that, what is the basis? Well, we didn't really have to break AES because that actually didn't appear it turns out that it cancels out and it doesn't appear in any of the equations. So we were able to break the randomization routine around it. It's called cipher block chaining. And with that mode broken there, we proved that there's so much information, believe it or not, in the randomization routine that we can go directly to the original message. And
interesting.
That's fun. That's fun. When you show it to people, people go, but that's so simple. And we go back to the people can see the complicated things, but they have trouble with the simple things.
So we have this paper where we've used a bunch of math to kind of show what this looks like, but that math needs to be executed somewhere. Do you know if this was turned into like a tool or people were able to use this to actually practically do anything?
I know that there are people out there using it practically because it turns out that the math is so simple.
Yeah.
The math, the equation for the math, it's basically XORs. The final equation was PT of I minus, or PT of I is equal to CT of I minus 1 XORed with CT of J minus 1 XORed with PT sub J. And that was the entire equation. It comes out to 4 numbers, 2 of which you can see and read directly from the ciphertext, and the other 2 you can infer.
Wow.
And yes.
That is quite interesting. And I think because whenever we talk about cryptography and different attacks on it, people just think that somebody's figured out how to solve it quickly or something like that. But it sounds like you're speaking to different approaches that cryptography is susceptible to, such as just bypassing all the encryption and just replacing the data and finding that directly.
Well, Dr. Hiramoto always told me about stuff like that. He said, don't go for the hard stuff. It's too hard. Solve the easy stuff and put it together. And that approach is a very good approach. And it turns out that you can break portions of things and put them together, and what you get is an overall solution.
So the different blocks or sets, so to speak, you just focus on those.
I focus on those because anything you can describe as a set, you can use in a particularly interesting field. It's called set theoretic estimation. It's an algorithm that came around in the mid-1960s when their creators, there were 2 creators, and they did it sort of in parallel. Their job was what they said, it's determining the identity of fast-moving objects. And by fast-moving objects, they meant jet planes because it was the middle of the Vietnam War. And what they realized was there are limits to what things can do. For instance, a jet cannot go instantaneously backwards in the other direction. So,
correct.
Right. So what you do is you get rid of that solution, and eventually you break it down.
Constrain it.
Right. You constrain it. And what I've always said is it's easier to break something than it is to build it. So I don't build a solution. I break down the original to get to the solution. And that particular methodology has been developing over the years. And in 1991, a gentleman by the name of Cambetis distilled everything we knew. And at that point in time, it sort of stayed without too much work in it until Dr. Wells introduced it to me. And I said, this is perfect, because what is happening is we want to get rid of all the extraneous information. We want to get rid of all the keys that aren't there. And we'll eventually come down to the right key. And so he handed me that paper. And that paper was what I was considering when the policeman thought that I was dead on the bench.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. These are some hefty problems.
It does, but it also leads to a different way of looking at things so that solutions can be more easily arrived at. I mean, it's a great algorithm. Does it work for everything? Well, it does work for everything. Does it work well? That's a little different problem. It works well for some problems, and it turns out it's much easier to take the shortcuts that we teach people in math than it is to do the set theory and other problems. So I concentrate on problems that use that kind of set theory. And we've come to some really interesting conclusions and interesting research.
We're talking about constraining things. And I think, with the jet planes, constraining in the different directions that they're going. And I think that's what we're doing a lot in cryptography with the attacks. It's constraining the actual number of cycles you need to do it, because you've shown that there's actually not these particular keys showing up in the signature, so they're not going to exist. And what we think is something that's very hard to crack and would be like sort of impossible for normal computers. Maybe we'll talk about quantum computers next, but something that would be impossible to crack for normal computers is now all of a sudden way easier, because they're not using the full set of characters that they could be using. And then boom, there's these sets that repeat, where all of a sudden there's other ways where you can really reduce it. And then ultimately at the end, it's not this super hard thing to break. there's a new equation that sort of breaks what you need to break, and you're able to access the stuff. Is that sort of like I know I gave maybe a fuzzy example, but is that sort of an attack vector that people exploit towards cryptography?
It should be, but most people don't. If you look at the properties of what happens, like let's take language, right? And the properties of language. We know that, for instance, if we're just using lowercase English to encrypt something, because that's harder to break, we know about the frequency of letters. So E is the big one that happens all the time. So what we can do is we can say, if the letter that comes out has a probability between 8 and 12%, then it's possibly an E. And we call those things property sets. And so we can create a whole bunch of property sets and bring them together to get rid of things that don't fit into the property sets and eliminate them.
Okay, hold up. Have you ever done Sudoku?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Those are kind of like, as you're distilling like what's available, are those not sort of property sets, could you say?
Yes.
Of the available keys that you can kind of put in?
Yes, they are. And we're getting ready to publish a paper on the solution of property sets using set theoretic estimation. So,
very cool.
Yeah, it turns out that the property sets, there aren't too many. And we got a 99.6% return on correct Sudokus over, I think we did 400 Sudoku examples from easy to really hard. And so that's exactly the way that it's done. And it can be applied to that, to Mastermind, the old game Mastermind. So,
what kind of game is that? I don't know if I played that one.
Well, Mastermind is a game where you have 4 colored pegs and you can make different colors, right? Mm-hmm. And you hide the key or the solution, and the player comes up and uses pegs to try and duplicate the key in colors and in place. And you get a little bit of feedback when you get one in the right place. One color in the right place and it's the right color, there's a black peg. And if you get the right color in the wrong place, you get a white peg. And you have, I think it's 12 to 14 moves to try and replicate the answer, the pattern. Okay. And so that's Mastermind, but we can use it in quite a few solutions. I mean, we even use it, believe it or not, to identify individual aquarium fish, because that one sounds a little weird, and you're asking the question, why would we do that? And the answer is because the aquarium fish, certain aquarium fish have patterns on the outside that indicate that they have tumors, and those tumors are used in the research of human cancer.
Here's a question. Is this like basically AI though? Like these patterns, all AI is a whole bunch of like crazy different letters and all this kind of thing with different dimensions. Is what you're doing kind of very similar?
Well, actually it is, because believe it or not, the artificial neural networks are a form of set theory. And you can prove that using an assumption, or not an assumption, a piece of data called the asymptotic equipartition property, which is a fancy name for a relatively simple algorithm, but it's a little hard to explain. So as it turns out, yes, they're in the same family and they're very related.
That makes a lot of sense. But also, kind of as a head scratcher as well, because I know that initially there was like this kind of a joke, I think it's from the show Silicon Valley, maybe it's called like hot dog or not hot dog. And it used AI to identify if a photo was like a hot dog or not a hot dog. Sounds like that's sort of what you're doing. I mean, I know I use AI to identify like what kind of plant something is, or like what kind of bird I see. Sounds like you're sort of doing that. I'm curious because we're talking science. We're talking with you more theoretical, where we're talking XOR and like fundamental stuff. When we're applying that, so say to something like fish, how are you dealing with getting the inputs and factoring in, like there's a camera input that's going to view certain things? Is that like maybe a different team, or how do you think about handling all those different inputs on the more technology software side? How does that factor into things?
We take a look at the patterns. We break the picture down into patterns. Okay.
It can be represented by data, not image. Right?
That's right. So the image, if you go across the image, it turns out that they have different colors in different places, right?
Yep.
So you make a block cipher of it, and then you solve the block cipher. So
now, so when it gets to actually implementing that, are you actually writing like machine level code or something like that, or are you just handing this to your programmer friend and he's taking all the different steps and just applying them to whatever thing? Like, what does that side of it look like?
Well, I did actually program it for a while. And then a few people came up and said, you're much more valuable doing the math.
Yeah.
We'll get you a staff of programmers who do it. So I have a team of programmers, and they include my sons and some of the other programmers I picked up. I've got a programmer up in Anchorage, Alaska. I've got programmers here in Texas and in a few other places. And we meet together and we decide exactly how to implement that. And then I go off and think about other things, and I come back and check on them and see how they're doing.
Yeah, it sounds like that's what you're best at, is coming up with the core solutions. It's probably not the best use of your time to also keep up with whatever changes to whatever language and this and that. So that is interesting, because I imagine some of this stuff is kind of a lot of code. Like, I would not know how to write a lot of this. This is like, you'd have to pass some crazy leak code to get a job at a place to be able to solve or like write a lot of these things, I would think. This is me as a PowerShell, not a traditional programmer.
Well, it turns out that you're right. There can be a lot of code, right? But if we're clever enough, we can sometimes cut that way down.
Right.
And there are times like when we were doing the initial, I start out people, when I'm teaching them how to do this, we start out breaking the Caesar cipher. Yeah.
That's one of the simple ciphers. Remind me which one that is, though. It's not a substitution. What is Caesar?
Caesar cipher is the one like you rotate by 3. It's actually what's called a rod end cipher. And there's only 26 keys because it's circular. You move around the possible mappings, right?
So it's a shift kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a shift kind of thing. Okay. And so if you're familiar with it, it's usually a shift right. Okay. Oh. So when we do that, the coders actually come up with solutions, and the solutions that they have to program are usually under 100 lines to break it. And it amazes the kids that I'm teaching, because they get the right answer, and they've always assumed that there's some special knowledge or some special trick. And I show them how to do it, and they replicate it very easily. So it can be very concise and very small.
So we have one of these tools that the programmers have worked on. What does it look like? What kind of input would you even give it? Would you give it a whole long string signature kind of thing, and the output would be the contents behind it? Or like, what does it look like to do that?
We give a message to them, and we tell them what size the block is and what alphabet we're using, because this works for every alphabet. And remember that the alphabets vary. The smallest alphabet is only 4 characters, human language. And the largest one we've dealt with, we don't deal with symbols, because the symbols, like in Chinese, there's just so many of them, we don't have time to play with it. Symbols like, come out, the alphabet that comes out of Indian languages is up around 64 characters. That's that's a big alphabet. And so all they do is they know that information, and we say, okay, come back with a solution, come back with the, come back with the original message. We never ask them to come back with the key, because the key is meaningless. And I know that cryptographers will look at me and say, what do you mean it's meaningless? A crypto system is not broken unless you come back with the key. And we use a simple example to show that that's not true. The example we use is a general who's coming up on a battle, and his crypto specialists and his signal intel people come in with a message that they have intercepted. And what's the general going to say? The general's not going to say, okay, that message that you found last night, what was the key? what he's going to say is, tell me what the bad guys are talking about.
Right.
And so it's fun when we talk with people. The cryptographers are sometimes fixated on getting a key instead of getting the right answer.
And that speaks to the XY problem that applies to all of us. We all get lost in it sometimes. It's interesting to see where that pops up. But the XY problem is basically you are trying to solve X, but then you get lost trying to figure out why. X, in this instance, is decrypting the data and getting access to the data. That's the core problem you're trying to solve. Anything other than that is a distraction of your time, right? That's ultimately what we're trying to do is secure data. Give me the unsecured data. Oh boy, that's the problem. So
yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah. Interesting to see it. Back to the basics though, you just break things down, take a step back. It can be hard when things are unfamiliar and overwhelming to do that, but there's always an opportunity unless things are super urgent. It cannot hurt to take a step back, breathe. I'm really connected with the fact that all of our perspective as humans is going to be flawed to a certain degree, which is why I really like that sort of removing myself and kind of looking at it, the whole system. And I think it can help to do that whenever you're getting lost on problems or maybe overwhelmed with what's going on.
We're expressing our own biases, actually, and sometimes in the algorithms and the mathematics we use. And I always have a good time with random number generators because I watched the old Deal and No Deal program.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that the $1 million is more often in cases 17 and 6 than it is anywhere else. And so that reveals a bias in the underlying pseudo-random number generator that they put the values into the briefcases.
Right. Yeah. A lot of times we hear biases, we think about maybe how we view other people, but it can also apply to things like, algorithms we use as well, which will lead to certain results. Very interesting to see. Did you do that research or did you just see it in like your circles where somebody looks at all the cases?
Actually, that was came on a Deal and No Deal program I was watching.
Oh, really? So they were like, oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, you have to watch these biases. This is why we say you have to think outside of the box. Because what is the box? The box is your bias.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I consider it a sign of intelligence if someone is connected to the reality that they could be wrong and there could be room to grow at any moment. Just because you have confidence in it, there's things that I think are for sure true, but I'm still open to if there's some evidence to the contrary. Like I'm not going to be so lost in my confidence in this that I forget that I'm human and totally could be making a mistake like all humans can do. And regularly humans think they're totally right about something and they're not. And I am no less susceptible to that than other people at some point. So keep ourselves honest when we can. And I think it speaks to also the importance of having other people that you speak to and other people like, you're mentioning some mentors in the cryptography space. Don't get lost in your own head. It can be so helpful to just tap in with the perspective of someone else and sort of see how they're approaching things.
Well, it's interesting. My lab does a lot of work on fundamental research with the substitution cipher because our associates have said there's nothing interesting in that area. And yet we've come up with nearly 70 papers that relate to this that have been published. And we keep learning new things and we keep looking at what they mean and shaking our heads. For instance, if everything is an S cipher, why go through all the work that like AES or these round ciphers do to come up with a key to use? Why not just randomly pick a substitution key and you're done? But that doesn't get enough play because people say, no, it's not complex enough. And we have to remember that complexity does not equal security.
Absolutely. And in fact, complexity can kind of make things a little bit harder when it comes to security a lot of times. Not so much, I'm not really referring to the cryptography encryption space, but just in general, like you can keep things simple. They're a little bit more maintainable, a little bit more addressable, a little bit less technical debt, and just happier life in general. But, you got to do what you got to do. There's business choices that will be made. But I'm curious. So we're talking cryptography. The idea, something we consider secure, I guess, generally is if you can't crack it using standard attempts against the whatever they're using to secure it in a reasonable amount of time for a human. who's alive on Earth with current computers. Is that kind of fair to say? It's like eventually, if you're given an infinite amount of time, you could crack anything.
True.
But the idea is that it wouldn't be really reasonable in our lifetime, kind of thing.
Well, we do a lot of work in breaking these big numbers down, because when you talk to a lot of people who are in companies and picking the cryptography that's being used, they look at the key space, and the key space is god-awful huge. But they forget some things. One of them is sometimes there are things called equivalent keys, where, if you don't use all the letters in the alphabet, this is a good example. You have keys, different keys that will come up with the same answer for the message. And so what you do is you pick the keys that are equivalent that will do that, put them in a set, and then, these are isomorphic sets. And you can get a number of sets, and they can have, I've done work where they've had billions of keys that are in the isomorphic set. And then all you have to do is pick one, any one of those keys, called the systematic isomorph, and you apply it. And if you get the answer, well, it doesn't matter, you're done. If you don't get the answer, you've eliminated all those keys, because they'll give you the same answer as the one you picked.
So all of a sudden, let's say it takes a gazillion attempts. Well, you've just cut that down a whole bunch. So forever, it is not that far away. All of a sudden, the more of these reductions in what you're actually needing to solve, like, it's exponential how much faster things can get.
Yeah, and there's another technique that we use that's really fun when we're doing language techniques. It turns out that certain combinations of letters are not possible in the language. Like, how many times have you seen QK or QZ?
Right.
And by the time you get up to blocks of size 6, so you're taking 6 letters at a time. Let's say you've got AES and it's taking 6 letters at a time. It turns out that the number of keys that produce that, we call these n-grams, we call them forbiddens, because they can't happen in normal English, right?
Right.
And if you look at that, by the time you get up to a set size or an n-gram size of 6, what you've done is the number of forbidden n-grams, the ones that don't appear, are just over 97% of the possible combinations. And so what you've done is, like, for the n-grams, 6 n-grams, you're over 300 million possible n-grams, but only 2 million are actually allowed. So the numbers, you can take these huge numbers and vastly drop them and make a much easier problem of solving. And so people say, it'll take 3 or 4 times the lifetime of a universe. And you find out when you do a little reduction, they'll take about an hour and a half on a computer.
Yeah, it is incredibly exponential. That's why we consider it so secure, because as you add more and more, like, it's so harder to solve. But same thing the opposite way. As you remove all these factors, it can be kind of scary how easy it is. Gosh, that is a lot to think about in terms of, so there's like collisions when you have that many, options. A lot of them are going to have to represent the same thing. That's sort of like distill it down. Like, you have literally so many numbers. You only have so much data. Multiple of those combos are going to represent the exact same thing, because there's just too many numbers that your sample size is. Mm-hmm. And because of that, you're able to distill it down. Is that like the TLDR?
Right. Yeah, it is.
I'm sure there's a lot more math that goes into it, but I don't know. How would you even avoid that without doing the polymorphic thing you mentioned earlier? Because
the answer is
double the amount of numbers. Yeah, you just have, your end is a little bit bigger, but it's the same process.
Yeah, you can't. And the interesting thing is, it depends on the individual message that you're sending. So that means that you can't easily figure out what's going to be the best every time. And so the people who are in charge of the cryptography and selecting the keys and things like that need to be analyzing the messages, but you may not be able to. I mean, IBM is sending millions of messages a day, and how can they calculate it out? The answer is there are ways to do it, but it takes a little bit of time. So,
Again, it seems to me like what we're talking about, it's kind of, is it still not a substitution?
No, it's a substitution cipher if you treat it right.
Right. But I mean, it seems like very obvious to my mind that that's sort of what it is. Now that you've explained it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, am I wrong? It kind of seems like
it should be easier, but people make it harder because they say, no, it can't be that easy. So we're not going to do it that way. We're going to stay with AES. We're going to stay with something else, right? And all they manage to do is to make life harder for themselves and things less secure.
Yep. That is just so interesting to me. Huh. It's a challenge.
It's a little bit counterintuitive, right? And let me tell you, when we first hit upon that, we went, oh, this can't be true. And then we proved it mathematically and went, wow, it is true. Now, how do we introduce it so that we don't scare people? Because revolutionary ideas are, and revolutionary findings are very hard to get people to accept. And speaking to the way we look at it in our brain and doing things differently, Dr. Hiramoto always used to tell me, you can't have revolutionary ideas if you're doing the same old thing. I know that sounds sort of simple, but it is true. It's very true. And so we would bring these revolutionary ideas out in the papers, and believe it or not, it takes about 25 years for people to understand a new concept in cryptography. And we're hitting that area now with the work that we're doing, and that is causing more and more of our work to be accepted and to be worked on. And while nobody was doing polymorphic ciphers for years, we're now finding researchers who are specializing in polymorphic encryptions. And
that would possibly enable industries and governments in the future to more properly secure their data.
Yes.
Which is that's a huge deal. I talk about security, it's everybody's responsibility, but we would all greatly benefit from that because we all kind of, we're all susceptible. We all pretty much use similar encryptions. So the more secure they are, the better we all are.
And if we don't understand them, we're going to be blundering around, and somebody in the hacking community is going to come out and they're going to eat our lunch.
Absolutely. I think something you spoke to about your mentor bringing up something simple. I find that the people I look up to the most and I consider the smartest often bring simplicity. Not saying there's obviously a lot of complexity in other ways, but to be able to distill it down into something that just is digestible and so true, and to be able to remind people of the things that we all know but sort of forget, like perpetually forget. Got to have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, there is a certain amount of elegance in, people think that smart people handle complexity real well. They sort of do, but the point is they don't make things overly complex. They just don't.
Yeah. And I think the things that are complex, you spend enough time on it because maybe you're interested or you really want to learn it. And all of a sudden, it's like the back of your hand. It's kind of not that complex to you. To get there, yeah, complex, practice, all this stuff out of your current depth. But once you're there, it's like the thing you like. It's very easy to access thoughts in your mind and to be able to speak to these things and think constructively.
The more you know, the easier it gets.
Yep. And it's just interesting to see that be so true. And I hope that people out there, just anyone, if you're PowerShell or not, finding those opportunities to just keep growing over time, because you will connect dots and find connections and grow as a person if you're out there growing in some way, hopefully perpetually, and hopefully with us here on the PowerShell Podcast. But honestly, any community, whatever you're doing, if you push the limit, we all benefit. Similar to how, polymorphic key reduction. What was it? Polymorphic
encryption.
Encryption. There you go. Yeah. So it changes as it goes. I want to talk about quantum computing because that's another dimension changer. Like we're talking about, you can only do X number of cycles. It's secure if it takes more than that, which we know there are some ways around that. But when we introduce quantum computing, quantum to me just means super duper fast, like exponentially so, to where the way we're approaching these problems and how long it takes to solve some of these encryption kind of goes a little bit out the window. Can you speak a little bit to quantum computing, where it is, and your involvement in it?
Well, my involvement in it is with the IEEE. I serve on an IEEE committee that is designing cybersecurity for the future. And my specialty on there is, of course, entropy, which is the amount of surprise and the amount of randomness that you put in, and encryption. There are two major functions that work on encryption in the quantum environment, also known as the post-quantum environment, or PQE. And one of the things that you have to understand is that quantum computers have a different architecture, which make them able to solve different problems faster. It really doesn't change the mathematics. Your mathematics stay the same in the PQE as they were in the classical environment, which means that the changes in what's going on are due to that hardware and what the hardware can do. So if you take something like public key encryption, the public key encryption is it's based on some very interesting mathematics, right? And they have to do with primes. You know, you have Euler's totient equation, you have factorization and semi-prime factorization, things like that. Okay, and the quantum computer works on that very effectively. This was shown in Shor's algorithm, which happened, I believe, in '94. It's been around for a while, and that's for asymmetric algorithms, which means that you have two keys. Now, I always laugh at the two key assumption, because this comes back to where people say, if I've got one key, then two must be better, right?
Yep.
So what happens? We publish one key. So that means it's known, and we're back to one key left. So we really don't have a two-key algorithm. We only have a one-key algorithm. Now, normal symmetric algorithms are things like we use with the AES and with substitution cipher. That is governed by Grover's algorithm, which just says that we can go faster, so you need to increase the number of keys by the square root of 2. So we'll round it up by you need to double the amount of keys that you use. Okay. Shor's algorithm is a little different, and it really eats we call it quantum candy. The keys are quantum candy because quantum computer eats them left and right, and they go very, very quickly. They're solved very quickly in the PQE with the quantum computer. Okay. That's all fine and well and good. But what that means is that when we get a computer that actually is able to do Shor's algorithm, now Shor's algorithm, last I read in the papers, needs about 6,000 qubits. And what's IBM got right now? IBM's got a little over 100 qubits. So there's
qubits are essentially computing units.
Yeah, they're the quantum computing units, and they're the analog of bits. And so the problem is we got a ways to go before that happens. And right now, governments are putting billions of dollars into research. But it worries me a little bit, because if quantum implementation of Shor's algorithm was so good, what government wouldn't put a ton more than just $13 billion, which is what was spent, I believe, in 2022, 2023, that time period? Wouldn't you put more money into it? It seems like what we've got is, well, we'll put enough money so that we've got plausible deniability. If it comes about, we'll say, well, we were investing in it. So quantum computers really haven't hit the general space yet, because a quantum computer is going to need probably in the neighborhood of 1 million bits, qubits, I should say, in order to work correctly. That's going to take a while to get them to do, because a quantum computer, IBM tells us that the average quantum computer has a coherence time, and that's the time that it can actually work, of about 200 milliseconds per run. Okay? And how long does it take it to get cold enough to run? The answer, according to IBM, is about 2.5 days. So for every 2.5 days, you get 200 milliseconds of runtime. Now, people have said, we'll go to space and do it. Yeah, that's fine, but space is still too hot. It takes a temperature of approximately 20 millikelvins and that's cold. I mean, that's freaking cold in order to work correctly. But outer space is got a temperature of about 2 to 3 Kelvin. And it's always that last part that costs so much to use. So when I look at cryptography, the answer in the PQE right now is to use symmetric algorithms that we use in regular classical space and environment, and ignore the asymmetric algorithms because of what happens with their with being eaten up. Now, NIST created 4 what they called QPAs, quantum proof algorithms. And the first quantum proof algorithm was broken in a month on a classical machine. So that shows that NIST needs to do a little bit more testing and experimentation. And the other 3 QPAs are based on lattice arithmetic. And it's not really clear if that's going to be a hard type of algorithm to break. And there was a guy in China who said he broke it, but they found an error in his algorithm. So is it going to be a good one? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. So it sounds like governments aren't investing a ton of resources and really pushing the needle. They're kind of like, we have this little device. We say IBM is like doing it, but it's kind of, we're dabbling in the waters. It's just our toes. We're not really knee deep yet.
Yeah. Just in case it works, we're going to show that we invested.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's still a developing space, nothing too concerning yet, but I think that will be a dynamic changer once that exists. And I think there's a lot of adversaries out there that will probably really have access to that technology.
There are some people who are working right now in breaking quantum machines and doing hacking. There's Dr. Mark Carney out of England, and he runs the Quantum Village at DEF CON. He's really good at that stuff. He's an expert at that. I'm not yet. I'm just trying to learn.
Awesome. Well, here's a question. So you spoke at DEF CON. I mean, cryptography, security, very close. How do you feel about your connection to the hacker community? Or do you feel like you're a hacker? Because I mean, technically you are. I think hackers maybe had a bad reputation in the past, but nowadays, I think to me, it just means someone who's willing to poke around, try things out, solve problems, and just kind of hopefully make things better in the end run. But what's your impression of the kind of hacker community? Because you've been in this space for a very long time.
Well, to tell you the truth, I am a hacker, right? And as evidenced by the things I break.
Yep.
But I try to spread the word on improvements. How about the black hats? I stay away from them. Are they good? There's a lot of good black hats out there. I mean, they really know how to do things. Have I broken into spaces and into computers? The answer is yes. But I mean, I've broken into a lot of computers. We once wrote a hack for the electrical utility system, in which it took us the sum total of 12 bytes to shut down a generation facility.
Oh wow!
So, yeah, that was a while ago. I haven't been practicing it for a while at that level. But what I'm doing now is basically hacking. I'm breaking modes. I'm breaking ciphers.
Yep.
But I'm also using that to make them stronger. I mean, we never would have been, and we actually were the first people to do a practical polymorphic encryption. My team and I had some undergraduates at a university helping me do that. But, you know, we're just trying to make things better. And if it takes breaking things, we'll do it.
And sometimes it absolutely does. You have to poke around and see where the weaknesses are. And when you find them, expose them and make them better for next time. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, because if the people who are sharing their findings aren't doing things, well, there are people who aren't sharing their findings that may be adversaries that are going to take advantage of the same exact techniques, and they may already be doing so. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's the right way, and I think that's sort of where we landed in the sort of security hacking space, is that openness and collaboration. It's for the greater good for all of us, and we all are sort of in this security thing together. It can't just be security and hackers who are responsible for security. It filters all the way down, so we're sort of all in this together in that regard.
If the bad guys are going to find it eventually, you might as well give it to the good guys so they can use it.
Yep, exactly. But it's very interesting to get the chance to dive into your perspective, to learn more about cryptography, to make it a little bit more approachable. So I think a lot of people view it as just kind of this magic black box thing that kind of, things happen and it's all magically secured at the end. But I think we did a good job at breaking down the different moving pieces that exist there, and how with any problem, if you distill it into the actual moving parts, and this applies for you at work solving problems, if you distill it into actually the moving parts and address it there, you're going to have a lot more success than just viewing this huge abstract problem with all these different moving pieces. And you showed us how you apply that with cryptography, but I think it can apply for all sorts of things that maybe are not nearly as complex, but still will require a little bit of an outside look, because there are some moving parts. Is there anything else you wanted to leave us with, wisdom-wise, or about your career that you wanted to share?
Well, I'll tell you, I think about my career and the things I've done, and I kind of envy other people who've done better hacks, but I found out that there's a lot of people who envy me, so it was a little bit of a shock. But remember, the more that you learn, the better off that you are. World knowledge, if you have more world knowledge, you can apply it to things. And so never give up on those classes that you have at the beginning of your college period where you say, why am I taking this? Because those patterns occur over and over and over again. And if you learn the patterns, you can say, wow, this problem looks like this problem. And if it's described by the same math, then what works over here will also work on my problem. And so that's a fun application.
I tell people a lot, you want to learn PowerShell, it's a language, use it. Mm-hmm. Well, based on what you said, languages are patterns.
That's right.
Right? All kinds of things are patterns. You just need to expose your brain to the patterns more and more, and eventually you'll see the connections and things get simpler. You can recall things, but no matter what it is you're working on in life, just spend some time exposing yourself to it. I think it is very interesting, and you showed us today, that something that seems so far removed, like doing basic algebra compared to what you're doing now, there actually is a tie-in. And I think whatever you're doing, try and see what it can look like in the future, and visualize like sort of what that journey could look like, because it's a lot easier to invest time in learning something when you actually think that you're going to get value out of it in the future. And I think that almost everything in the world that you would do for this kind of thing is going to be worth learning. Even if you don't apply it, you will be improved for having gone through that and seen the patterns and gain that perspective. You can take that with you somewhere else.
Yep, I agree.
Well, Dr. Al, it has been a pleasure talking to you today. Seriously, really appreciate you sharing your story with us, sharing your research. It's been I've had a blast. I think the audience can know that I'm not usually this excited during an entire podcast, but you've consumed a lot of my brain following along to this, and hope everyone out there learns something along the way as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I asked you for your socials. You don't have any. So I guess there's no way for people to find you if they wanted to. Any final words? Should they reach out to you? Should they support the IEEE? Anything like that? Any calls to action?
Obviously support the IEEE. And the reason I stay off social is because they're not safe. And that's what I do. I'm sure that you could get a hold of me through Andrew. I'll leave my contact information with him.
Perfect. Yeah. If this spoke to you, if you were thinking about a career in cryptography, if you're already maybe starting a career, please reach out. Happy to connect you. And again, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. And I hope people out there can see that while a lot of the stuff we talked to, we used big words, we used what's called jargon. In PowerShell, we have jargon, modules, functions, scripts. That's jargon. Every single sub place in life has jargon that describes things that would otherwise take a ton of words. And you use some jargon that helps you understand things a lot simpler. So despite it's this big, crazy cryptography thing, you're able to distill it down into terms that we can actually speak to and follow along. And that applies for everything in the whole world. I hope people can proceed forth with that knowledge that what we're doing is kind of similar to what other people are doing. And we're all in this together. Humans have been doing it for a long time. We can keep getting better. We've learned a lot, I think, especially in the math, cryptography, security space. So we'll keep that going. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
You can join us on the PDQ Discord, discord.gg/PDQ. If you want more PowerShell hands-on action, learn PowerShell Wednesdays every single Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Want to check out PDQ Connect? It's pretty cool. Awesome things coming next year as well. Check that out at pdq.com/podcast. Let them know. I guess I sent you. I don't know. Thank you, everybody. Take care of yourselves. And I hope that you are on your journey. I love hearing from everybody who's reached out about the podcast. And we're sort of all in this together. We're all at different stages. It's important not to compare yourself to anybody except for you in the past. Until next time, everybody, take care.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.